Fantastic.
I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. Yeah, what happens when, as we saw after World War I, a bunch of European countries just show up in the Middle East and draw lines all over the map and say, oh, these are the new countries, we don't care about the history or culture. Well, flash forward to 2014, and you end up with Islamic State, or ISIS. Stacey?
Exactly. And Max, it looks like Fox News and the Republicans were right. It looks like we might have an Islamic State ruling the world. The Islamic State now resembles the Taliban with oil fields. The Islamic State, which now controls an area of Iraq and Syria larger than the UK, may be raising more than $2 million a day in revenue from oil sales, extortion, taxes, and smuggling, according to U.S. intelligence officials and anti-terrorism finance experts. So it sounds, to me, like it's running its operations a lot like the U.S. operations.
Yeah, Islamic State is a bold new startup. I mean, think about all the startups you have. They're called disruptors, aren't they? They take advantage of social media. They've got ready access to currency. They're able, in this case, to do $2 million a day in revenue. But some are asking, when is Goldman Sachs going to take Islamic State public? I'm sure that America would buy into it, CNBC would report on it, and they could be a huge IPO.
Well, the danger to, I think, you know, Fox News and the Republican Party was right. A few years ago, they said during the Obama administration that we would become an Islamic State here in the United States. Well, the danger of that coming true is in this next factoid here, Max, about them. With his control of 7 oil fields and 2 refineries in northern Iraq and 6 out of 10 oil fields in eastern Syria, the terror group is selling crude at between $25 and $60 a barrel. That's up to 75% discount. Americans, of course, their number one concern always is the price at the gas station pump.
Right, they're disrupting the cartel. You know, oil has been a cartel, the pricing like a cartel. Now Islamic State's coming in and they're underpricing the current cartel price. And as a result, they are set to become a huge player in this global geopolitical arena of oil and weapons.
And the other thing I thought when reading this, that reminded me of how the American, you know, mafia state, how any state really, but the America is the empire now, is, you know, the Islamic State, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, Nusra Front, whatever they started out as, they keep on changing and adopting a new flag, a new logo, a new brand. And one of the things that they do is they shake down the local population. They take a cut of all bank robberies, for example. So, of course, in the U.S., they've taken a cut of the massive wealth with the robbery that happened during the 2006, 7, 8 period.
Well, remember during the Somali pirate crisis just a few years ago, the Somalis were, pirating off the shore of Somalia, and then they created a stock exchange where you could buy stock in future pirating excursions. The real estate in Kenya skyrocketed in value because all the cash coming in from the Somali pirates. And so Islamic State, I think, looked at that and said, you know what, there's a lot of money to be made out there. We just carve out a state called Islamic State or whatever, or Iraq and Syria. And, these lines in the Middle East, as I said before, are just randomly drawn to begin with. There's no real reason for them. It's just all been basically politics driven. So as a result, it makes perfect sense.
That could be them building the 50-story tower behind us. By the way, this view will no longer be available pretty soon, as in they're building a 50-story tower. So if you hear noises out there, it's just the Islamic State or whoever, I don't know, one of these groups. Maybe it's the Somali pirates who learned from the Dutch East India Company, of course. But, running these, these sort of operations, as the U.S. has found, as every empire before the U.S. has found, and now as Islamic State is finding, according to the Bloomberg article, they say that still, while ICE may now be the wealthiest terrorist group on the planet, war fighting and administering territory is expensive, the official said. And although the Islamic State is flush with cash now, a key question is how sustainable its self-financing will be. Because the flip side of the self-sufficiency is that there's a lot of territory that they control now that has no oil wealth. And these are the ones that are sucking the state, the Islamic State, dry by all these people. You know, they want to be paid to sweep the streets, they say in the article. So they're costing money, but not giving any money to Islamic State, and complaining and signing up for the welfare rolls and all that sort of stuff that the Islamic State now has to take care of.
Right, so to put this into context, comparing it to America, for example, when Fox News talks about the parasite liberals, You hear this often from Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity talking about the parasitical liberals. Over there in Islamic State, this would be equivalent to the apostate. So the apostate, they're not totally driven by the ideology of the red state, that is IS.
Well, but in a way, if you're really anti-state, you would be for these parasites because they suck the state dry and force it to collapse. So already in this Islamic State is the genesis, the birth, the seeds of its destruction, because it has to take care of these people who have no oil wealth. And that's also, I think, does show you a lot about what the facts of the world. The oil-rich areas are rich. The empires always want to control the rich areas, the oil, in this case, it used to be gold during the Spanish Empire.
Right, well, Islamic State are a classic example of libertarianism. So I'm sure that all the libertarians in America, like we hear from the folks over there at various universities, would be completely in support of the Islamic State because they're practicing libertarianism to its fullest extreme. So, of course, libertarianism means don't take care of the sick, don't take care of the elderly, don't give women any kind of rights. Exactly what you see in America, exactly what you see in the red states, exactly what you see in American version of libertarianism. It's just suck all the cash dry, and everyone else can die.
The other thing I thought when I was looking at this to compare it to the U.S. and things that we understand and know and see in our own backyard is that the Islamic State is self-financing not only through oil, but through shakedowns and harassing the local population. So this also makes it more difficult for the U.S. to apply sanctions like they could for Al-Qaeda and bin Laden's operation, for example. They said because all their donations came from outside and they could cut off that source of funding. Well, here I'm looking at the harassment and what we see, economic harassment. Economic harassment and the Ferguson crisis. So they look at Ferguson, Missouri, and what they found was economic harassment. Basically, it's one of the highest in all of the United States, where these people are shaken down constantly by the police because it's the second highest source of revenue for the Ferguson, Missouri municipality. And these are like parking fines, going through red lights or turning right on red when you shouldn't, and things like that, parking over a yellow line. So the municipality collects some $2.6 million a year in fine and court fees, typically from small-scale infractions like traffic violations. This is the second largest source of income for that small, fiscally strapped municipality. And in fact, they were collecting $312 in fines per household in Ferguson, Missouri.
I hadn't heard this story, and this is incredible to me. So in Ferguson, Missouri, the shakedown from the police of the citizens and from the courts on minor infractions are what keeping that government alive. And as a result, there's huge unrest from people who are tired of being shaken down in this manner. Well, again, this is what happens when a government spends all of its money supporting these foreign excursions and foreign wars. There's no money to pay for basic services. The cops are told, go shake people down on the highway, steal their cash, and they're going to end up with an uprising right there in the U.S. It's a classic end of empire story.
And, well, one of the guys that they talked to in this article says that you don't get $321 in fines and fees and 3 warrants per household from an above-average crime rate. You get numbers like this from BS arrests for jaywalking and what the report calls low-level harassment involving traffic stops, court appearances, high fines, and the threat of jail for failure to pay without a meaningful inquiry into whether an individual has the means to pay. Well, I'm also saying compare this to the Roman Empire and they collapsed. Why did the Romans welcome in the Visigoths, the Goths, the Vandals, all those people from outside? Why did they accept them in? Well, because they were being shaken down constantly by the Roman emperor for financing all his wars. And here these people are just like, forget it. I'm being shaken down by these guys at home. Might as well go be shaken down by those other guys who want to come in.
No, it's exactly analogous. You have the silver denarius of Rome that was clipped, the famous coin clipping that went on. The soldiers to defend the empire were noticing that they were getting paid less and less and less, and so the Vandals came in, the barbarians came in. Here in the U.S., they have a version of coin clipping. It's called quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve Bank. Yeah. They also have rampant inflation that's hidden by shrinking the size of packaged goods, so you get a third or half the size for the same price, so-called shrinkflation. in all the other examples where the economy is being carved out, it's being drained of its vitality because America can't really pay for these wars anymore. And you've got companies, as we've said before, Burger King going to Canada to avoid taxes. They don't want to pay for the wars. They just want the cash. So as a result, Ferguson, Missouri, I think, is just one of 1,000 such uprisings in America, probably in the next 18 months.
Well, actually, because you mentioned the Burger King story, that's going to be an issue that you face more and more across U.S. municipalities, not only because they have the lower corporate tax revenue because of all these, the tax inversions, but you also have more people requiring, subsidies. And you also are going to see, the retirees from these municipalities also demanding more and more of these shakedowns. So it becomes a point where all of these people in this town, they're incurring a criminal record because of these debts that are for small-time jaywalking. Oh, by the way, I must tell the international audience, because this hasn't really hit the rest of the world, that you get fined for jaywalking, walking across the street. It's only a concept in America that was brought in by the car lobbyists anyway, decades ago, because so many pedestrians were being run over by cars, and it gave bad headlines. So what they said is, let's make it, they're the stupidest jaybird.
Hey, Stacy, I thought jaywalking was crossing the street while smoking a J.
I'm not sure what that means, but no.
All right, well, stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to turn once again to Trace Mayer. He is the leading monetary expert on Bitcoin and gold. You notice I said that you were the leading monetary expert. You could quite possibly be in the world today, given your writing on the subject, your involvement in Bitcoin. I want to turn again to where we left it off last time, Trace, this bit license in New York. What are they trying to do, and what should we do as Bitcoin advocates?
Yeah, so Benjamin Losky, the superintendent, he's passed proposed regulations for Bitcoin-related companies, actually virtual currency companies. So it's very broad, it's very vague, and it's very discretionary. And so in effect, it's going to stifle a lot of innovation, which I don't necessarily think is a very good idea for the U.S. geopolitically. And I don't think it's good for New York City, particularly. It's going to hurt their economy. We're not going to, companies won't come here. One of the largest companies that testified at their hearing, Circle, said, we're not going to do any business with New York residents or businesses. And so,
right, so
they're going to isolate themselves.
The Bitcoin community, big players are saying, we're just not going to work in New York. And but of course, they're protecting their turf, right? Because here's the biggest, when you say about disintermediating forces of Bitcoin, the New York banks are the ones who are going to be disintermediated, right? So they're just protecting their own.
Yeah, or at least that's the way they look at it. It's like, oh, we're not going to allow blogs because it could hurt our newspapers. The technology's coming. Like, why don't you get ahead of the curve, If more companies had an internet strategy in 1995, and those companies that did have an internet strategy, we see where they're at now. And those that didn't, well, their newspapers' earnings are down 97%. I mean, it's a completely demolished industry. And I think it's very analogous to banking. We've seen the internet just attack shipping, we've seen it attack mail, we've seen it attack radio, newspapers, press.
Taxi drivers.
Taxi drivers with Uber and protests in Berlin. Like, at the end of the day, this is new technology. It's going to creatively destroy old, obsolete systems. It's going to raise standard of living if you allow the innovation. And if you don't, you're going to live in North Korea.
Right. Well, you mentioned that people, the dot-com mania of the 90s, et cetera, people focus on the crash of the dot-com crash. They forget that from the crash gave us Amazon, Google. The biggest market capitalized companies in America and in the world are right at the top of that list, came out of that crash. So you're suggesting that New York, instead of being one of the winners in this new technological front, looks like they've opted to become one of the losers.
Yeah. At the end of the day, Ben Losky's really gotten above his pay grade with these regulations. Where would the U.S. be if it didn't have Facebook and Google and all of these helpful things for the U.S. intelligence services? Like if we're going to talk about, do we really want to drive all the innovation to Singapore and to Beijing and to Moscow? Because I'm sure they'd welcome it with open arms, if they could take away all that knowledge the U.S. intelligence services have from Visa and MasterCard on what's actually going on in the Russian economy, they can take that away, that knowledge. I think it'd be a very powerful tool for them.
Let's talk about Russia for a second, because they're making some moves here. They are bringing in that Chinese credit card.
Yeah.
I think it's Unicard to get out of UnionPay, get out of MasterCard and Visa. They've been buying gold very aggressively for years now. So they're one of the biggest gold holders in the world. They are doing selective sanctioning. They are coming at as pretty smart in all this. One thing that surprises me, though, the penny hasn't dropped yet in the Kremlin in terms of Bitcoin. In other words, from where we sit, after having lobbied them for years to buy gold, I'd take full credit for the Kremlin buying gold, by the way.
Well, they actually went to a GATA conference in 2005, and the guy that was #2 in the economics department attended. And the day after, gold started from the 425 to 725, and Putin was holding a gold bar in some of the propaganda. So I think the GATA guys actually had a lot to do, in addition to you, helping shift this idea that the real Achilles heel of the U.S. empire is gold and that economic calculation ability.
Right. So the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, Bill Murphy, Chris Powell. They had that conference. You're saying right after that?
Oh yeah, the guy from Russia attended, and right after it started that up leg, and there was a squeeze on this physical, because the Russians were taking physical delivery, and now the Chinese have gotten into it and taken 4,000 tons probably straight to Beijing.
Right. Now China and Russia and Iran have this cozy little Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They've got the new BRICS Bank. They're just getting out of the dollar, Chase. I mean, would I be foolish to hold my dollars, I think, right?
Oh, yeah. Dollars are kind of a bad idea. I mean, good in the short term because it's world reserve currency. We're in a great credit contraction. It's deflationary. But long term, everything's stacking up against the dollar. But I love gold, but in a lot of ways it's obsolete. Because we got this new technology with Bitcoin. You can't email gold around. How do you solve the payments problem with gold? I mean, you can't really do that. So, I see Bitcoin and gold as just very symbiotic.
What about in Germany is a great example. They want their gold back from, I guess it's New York. They see you laughing. Well, it's not nice to laugh at the Germans like this. You think Angela Merkel likes to see Trace Mayer laughing on the Keiser report? Are you trying to suggest that they'll never see their gold?
Well, I was actually laughing right in the face of one of the Bundesbank guys. I was at a conference, and a guy from the Bundesbank was there, and there was another person from another large European bank. And it was during one of the breaks, and the Bundesbank guy was actually he liked Bitcoin, so he was talking to me because I was presenting about it. And I asked him, I was like, how's getting your gold back going? And he starts dancing, and the other guy's like, well, we both know why. And I said, yeah, because you're occupied. So, I mean, they're not going to get their gold back. They're occupied. They got how many tens of thousands of American troops in Germany? They do whatever the U.S. says, and so does Japan. And so, okay, Angela Merkel, you get spied on. What are you going to do about it? You're going to not renew the military base? You're going to tell the U.S. to leave? That's the only real option that they have. Otherwise, they just get to do whatever the U.S. tells them to do.
Now, according to Jim Rickards, who we've had on the show a few times, he's author of Currency Wars, Death of the Dollar. I was talking to him about this recently, and he's like, well, Germany doesn't really want their gold back because as long as it's in New York, it can be manipulated.
The U.S. can, confiscate it, they can hypothecate it, they can re-hypothecate it.
Right, but he's saying they want it to be manipulated as a way to support the current system because they want a rollout of special drawing rights from the IMF, and they don't really want to go back to a hard currency, a gold-backed currency. But it seems to me that if we're really entering into a vicious currency wars like I think we are, then A, you would want your physical gold in your country, number one. And number two, unlike Rickards, I think this whole idea of geopolitics and Bitcoin has to be explored. I think looking at his books, they fall short of taking it to the 21st century. He's very much a 20th century currency warrior. He's not part of the 21st century in this Bitcoin development. Is it fair to say that you could wage global currency war, and I'm talking about $100 billion transactions of major currencies in Bitcoin on the blockchain? Is that possible? Is the security there? Is the liquidity there? Is that possible, Trace?
Yeah, the liquidity is not there yet. The security is getting there. At Armory, we've built out the tools. We've built out cold storage, multi-signature. We're building out the security there. Bitcoin's extensible, so you can keep building out features to it. you know, Jim Rickards, Currency Wars, great book. I think he presents a very strong case, a very strong analysis. But at the end of the day, it's a chessboard that existed, you know, in the past. We got a new chessboard now, and unfortunately, Jim Rickards doesn't really understand the technological innovation with Bitcoin. And so he can't provide a real succinct analysis because he just doesn't understand it. Not that he can't understand it, but he hasn't really, you know, Bitcoin's created by a bunch of PhDs in math and computer science and distributed systems. It's highly complex. Like, you don't just get it and you can't just gloss over it. Otherwise, you have a very superficial analysis of it.
Let's take a look at this geopolitical chessboard. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot here, but I mean, think of it. I remember the old game we had as a kid, Risk. You know, it was a geopolitical game, and you're moving pieces around. But how would this potentially? Obviously, Russia is the one that comes to mind right off the bat, because they're being targeted by the IMF, who's got this ridiculousness going on in Ukraine on behalf of the IMF to secure agricultural production in the Ukraine. Let's be honest, it's got nothing to do with Russia. It's about the IMF and the West wanting that agriculture product, and they want the military bases there. So, isn't it? Why don't they start to get more? Maybe they are. What are you hearing?
We're building the tools for them.
Yeah.
Like, here's a great example. With BitPay, we have Jeff Garzik, a Bitcoin Core developer that we've hired, and he built out a lot of the payment protocol. How could the payment protocol be applied in the Ukrainian situation? Well, with the payment protocol, you can authorize a transaction up to a certain amount of Bitcoin, and then you make lots of microtransactions, and it draws down against it, and then you settle it all in one big transaction. But you know that you're going to get paid at least for whatever you've shipped through the oil pipeline, for example. And so if there are no Bitcoins to authorize the shipment of oil, like Russia just wouldn't send them, as each barrel of oil goes through the pipeline, you're getting paid your Bitcoins in a non-reversible, non-forgeable, non-sanctionable way, and then
okay, so
you got the private keys yourself. You're not like letting somebody else hold your gold. You're not letting somebody else hold your Bitcoins. You're doing it all in this disintermediated way.
So this leverages the open ledger of Bitcoin, which is this open accounting ledger. There's private keys associated with it. So you can parse out a deal over a year or 18 months for oil through a pipeline, through that territory, and you can do it in a way that is completely above board and trustworthy on the open ledger. It's irreversible using these private keys. You don't need the US dollar.
Oh yeah, you don't need the US dollar, but one, you don't need any centralized. So you don't need SWIFT, you don't need like all of these tools.
Don't need the lawyers.
You don't need
the contracts.
Well, the contract, you can actually build the contract into the transaction, using the Bitcoin protocol. So it's all in the math. Like, you see it all in the computer language there.
Right, so Russia, China, Brazil, Iran, they've got the new BRICS bank. Even if they don't use Bitcoin as let's say, a reserve currency, they would still want to use the blockchain as a way to make it cheaper for them to do various currency swaps and everything else they need to do.
Oh yeah, and you can. I think when Bitcoin starts becoming a settlement currency, because you can use it to enforce leverage ratios like insurance contracts. There's lots of ways that we can apply this blockchain technology, and all of it is done and settled in the blockchain.
Right.
You know, so there's no counterparty risk. It's a huge deal. No Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, bailouts. Like none of this
the
stuff.
Settlements are done on the blockchain.
Yeah.
What does this mean? That means that we're not necessarily doing a deal in Bitcoin. If I've got a $2 billion agricultural deal to get through, we can settle that all up on the blockchain and settle, and it's all backed up essentially in a way that takes away all possibility of there being any fraud in that transaction.
Right.
If both parties.
And if you really wanted to, you could abstract dollars or rubles onto the blockchain, and then they're represented by really small, tiny amounts of Bitcoins, and then those trade atomically in the blockchain. So you're trading the what's representing the oil with what's representing the rubles on the blockchain.
Okay, we got about 30 seconds left, and I just wanted to get your final comments on, are we heading to World War III? Are we in World War III? Your thoughts?
I think we've been in it probably at least for 10 years. You know, how long we've been doing this gold price suppression scheme with Alan Greenspan. We got a U.S. empire that's occupying everybody, pledging everybody as collateral to consume people and take all their money and their identities and not let you grow or eat what you want to grow and eat. All these problems across the world, it all root cause in the U.S. empire, and I think a lot of people are fighting back against that, whether it's Putin or whether it's individuals.
And Bitcoin is the way to fight back.
Bitcoin is definitely a very powerful tool that individuals and states can use to fight this empire.
All right, thanks, Trace, for being once again on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Trace Mayer. If you want to reach us on Twitter, use Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.